Good morning.
Morgen, Rav Shmulik. All right.
Morning.
Morning, guys. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Kuf Tez Vav. We are continuing to learn about the Seder of the Seder. We left off with the machlokes between Afuna and Abchizda. If a person had, for vegetables that we use for karpas, only a vegetable that's also good for marar, like for example, chazeres, like chasa, what we call romaine lettuce. So we had the machlokes. Afuna was of the opinion that when you eat it for karpas, you only make the boire pri adama. And as Rashbam explains, that Rav Huna subscribes to the opinion as Reish Lakish does, that mitzvah is trichos kavana, since when you're eating that vegetable for karpas, you are only eating it for karpas. You don't have intent to fulfill the mitzvah of marar, so indeed you don't fulfill the mitzvah of marar, and therefore you would make the bracha when you eat it at the right time, which is, as we said, as it says in the pasuk, al matzois and then umeroirim, which is after we have the matzah. Rab Chizda tells Rav Huna it doesn't make sense that a person is going to really eat, so to say, to his satisfaction, the chazeres, even though he's only having in mind that he's doing it for karpas, but after he's full, he's satisfied with the mitzvah, only later will he make the bracha for the mitzvah? No. If the only vegetable you have is lettuce, then you make the, not only boire pri adama, but you also make the bracha al achilas marar when you have the karpas, and yes, you will eat it again, as we mentioned, in order to arouse the curiosity of the children. Now, Rabbi Chaim pointed out something very important. We mentioned, which is taka our minig, that when we have the karpas, we dafka don't eat the shiur. For us not to have to make a boire nefashos, for us not to have to make another boire pri adama. Now hold on. When we're speaking about did you fulfill the obligation, did you not fulfill the obligation, do you need to have kavanah, do you not have kavanah? But nedvaram amurim, that you ate at least the kazayis when you ate the karpas. Because if you don't eat the kazayis when you eat the karpas, then of course you did not fulfill the obligation of the eating of the mother because you didn't have the right amount of shiur. Okay. And we're going to continue. We're going to learn about matzah umarar. We're going to learn about whether matzah and the marar may be eaten together, which is really going to give us a gavaldic insight to what we do nowadays is that we eat the matzah and then we eat the marar. And then we make a sandwich, right? And we say that this is what Hillel did. And if we add Bizman Shabeis HaMikdash Chayim, we'll have a nigla understanding of why we add those words. Bizman Shabeis HaMikdash Chayim. And it's related, and it's going to be connected to a beautiful sugya of nullification. Now, we learn many times together the sugya of nullification. If one thing gets mixed with something else, bittul b'roiv, if you have to have bittul b'tam, according to many Rishonim, the sugya that we will be learning today regarding bittul is not about taste, whether the taste is nullified, whether the taste is not nullified. It's that when you're doing a mitzvah, and here it's a mitzvah of eating, and let's speak about matzah, is a mitzvah mido'eraisa even when there isn't yet a Beis HaMikdash. Like the Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim is the other second mitzvah that we have biblically today. Marar is midrabanan. So if one were to eat matzah and marar, mele if you consume two mitzvahs that are both on the same level, so one doesn't nullify the other. We're speaking about a ruchniisdik and bittul, not about a bittul of tam. But if one mitzvah is do'eraisa, then why are you mixing in something that on a biblical level you're not mechuyev to consume? That might nullify it. It diminishes it. That's the concept of mitzvahs. Armavat lezuzu, as we'll learn it out when we learn the sugya. We're going to explain again how the shitas hilal that we actually practice today is not being done the way people think it's not being done for the purpose that people think it's being done for. We're going to touch a little bit upon two fundamental laws of Tumah and Tara, one of which we learned in Shabbos, in Yud Gimel, in the sugya of the Shmoina Asar Davar. Another sugya that we're going to rechazer right now today, and we're going to explain why we wash our hands before karpas. We will actually learn today Kuf Desvav Machloikes between the Rashbam and the Tosfos, how to understand the Gemara. And because of this Machloikes, Al Pinigla, that's why we wash our hands and we don't make the bracha on Tilas Yodayim. It's Gavaldik. We're going to learn the source of that. We're going to learn about if someone eats the matzah without chewing it, just swallowing it. If someone eats the marar without chewing it, just swallowing it, whether they are yoitza, whether they're not yoitza. And finally, we're going to learn about the meaning of lechem oini, which are the words that the Torah says in the parsha of Kol HaBechor, right in the A, that lechem oini, it's written ayin nun yud. It's pronounced with the choilam on top of the ayin. Ki'ilu, it's written ayin vav nun yud. Lechem oini. We're going to learn three interpretations as to the meaning of that statement, the bread of oini. Chavra, let's start on Daf Kuf Tez Vav Amid Aleph. We left off 5 lines before the top of the Amid. Again, we are in middle of the scenario that the Mishnah spoke out, that a person only has romaine lettuce, chazeres, and you're using it both for karpas and for mutter. For sure, you're going to eat it twice. No debate about that. The question is, when do you make the bracha al achilas mutter? Rav Huna says only the second time. Rav Chizda says the first time. So says the Gemara that the Surya, they followed Rav Huna, which makes so much sense, as we know already that Rav Huna was eventually the Rosh Hashiva in Surah, so he was the Rav, so they followed his Psak Din, and Rav Sheshes, Berei, the Rabbi Yeshua, followed the ruling of Rav Chizda, that was a Talmud of Rav Huna, that disagreed with his teacher, because like we have on top of the Amid, later you're going to make the brach, it's unbefitting. What's the halacha? Says the Gemara, the halacha is like Rab Chizda. Now, according to Rab Chizda, no doubt, it's definitely better to use 2 different vegetables, one that's not good for mutter, for karpas, and later use a exclusive mutter vegetable. Of course, it's better to do it that way. Okay, but does Rab Chizda hold that you're mechuyev to find such a second type of vegetable? No, that Rab Chizda didn't say. If you have the same vegetable, then you use it by karpas, but if you make the alachilas mutter, again, eat the kazayas. However, there's a shita that goes beyond Rab Chizda. Rav Acha Berei de Rava was mahadir asha or yirakos. He made an effort, if he only had romaine lettuce, not to be happy with that, to go and find any other vegetable that could be used for karpas, la'afuke nafshe mepluta, not to enter the machloikes. And Baruch Hashem, at least we living now right now in Golus, which is terrible, but we're in a Golus of Ashirus, right? It's very easy for us. Speaking for us, I know that some people might be struggling, but for those who it's easy, that we make sure, taka, kimin hagenu, we use an onion, other people use a potato, not to eat lettuce, not to go into this question, this machlokes of Rav Huna and Rav Chizda. All right, moving on. Omar Ravina. So Rabbi Chaim is asking, we learned in the Mishnah that there are 5 different vegetables that are good for mutter. If a person cannot find another type, will it help using one for karpas and one for mutter? And the answer is no. Because if mitzvahs ain't tzriches kavana, even though we learned that when we learned the Mishnah that the seder is of significance, we spoke that out. And by the way, we spoke out the same thing that in matzah, the Mishnah prior, the seder chitim should be better than the other ones mentioned. It means if you can have an option, which one to get, and the first one the Mishnah mentions is chazeres, which is the main mutter. But it's still going to be good for mutter. Okay. So Amar Ravina, Amar Li Rav Misharsha B'Nei Rav Nasim. Chevre, here we go. Hachi Amar Hillel. Chevre, this Hillel is not Hillel Hazakin. Actually, this is an Amoid. It's not even a Tana. So told me Hillel in the name of the Gemara, which means he received such a tradition that what that way nichroich inish matzah umarer bahadi hadadi v'leichol. A person should not wrap matzah and maror together and eat it together, I want to take a very important pause, as this will be clarified on Amud Beis. But that don't envision the matzah as being a lafa, which many people had then, and putting the maror inside the matzah. First of all, oichet also. But take, imagine the matzah as being something harder. This detail will be in Negeya for a sugya we're going to learn later today on Amud Beis. But you're wrapping the lettuce around the matzah. Don't wrap one around the other, which is not the way we make the sandwich today. Now, all of this is of significance, al-pi Chasidus, but let's first speak about the pshat. He's speaking about not eating them together any way you want. But when we're speaking about wrapping, it is taka more practical to put their lettuce, which is more pliable, around the matzah. Don't eat it that way. Why? Because mishum the sfirulon. Because since now, not Hillel Hazaken, not during the times of the temple, but now in Golos, right before the Beis HaMikdash is going to be rebuilt. Bisman Hazem, right? We don't yet have a korban, so matzah taka remains the oiraisa, independent of you eating it with the korban Pesach. But maror, the obligation of eating maror when there is no korban Pesach is only midrabanan. So when you eat, when you're doing a mitzvah of eating and you're mixing together doiraisa derabanan, don't do that, because va'asei maror derabanan umevatalei lamatzah deoiraisa. Now, the way many Rishonim learn, it's not about bittul of the tam, because if it's about the bittul of the tam, who cares if it's doiraisa or derabanan? No, it's if one is so minute in relation to the other. However, roiv tam, that it's halachically nullified, and if they're both doiraisa, it's nullified. Nothing to do with that. It's about the chashivus. We're doing a mitzvah. So amazing. If both are doiraisa, Chevra, I know that we learned many other times that don't do mitzvahs together, don't make mitzvahs chavilois. That's a big question. How does that fit with the sugya? Let's shelve that for a second. There are times that even though you shouldn't have done it, okay, let's go, you should not do two mitzvahs together, but if you did it, at least you did two mitzvahs together. Each one is chashuv by itself. So one doesn't, so to say, overwhelm the other. And vafilu, let's read it inside. Vafilu lemanda amar, that mitzvahs, because of their own chashivus, ein mevat lezu, because of them being chashuv, they won't be nullified. Correct. Hanamili, when it's either a doiraisa bidoiraisa, which by the way was taka exactly how it happened when Hillel Hazaken did it, or when they're both derabanan, then they're not going to be mevatel one the other. However, abel doiraisa viderabanan. Asi derabanan umevatal le doiraisa gavaldik. The Bible, because as far as the matzah is concerned, the maror is not needed at all. Verstehst? So it's going to become completely nullified. So don't eat them together. Okay, now that we mentioned, this concept of mitzvahs and not mevatel one or the other, so man tana deshamat lei mitzvahs ein mevatel zu Hillel, this Hillel is taka Hillel Hazaken, and the Tanya, as we learned, that Amru olav al Hillel, they said about Hillel the elder, that Shahoya Koirchan bevas achas, that he would wrap them. The them of Hillel isn't only the matzah maror, but it's the Pesach and the matzah and the maror, the korban Pesach with the matzah and the maror, and he ate them together. And as it says in Bamidbar, al matzois umeroidim yoichluhu. And since the Torah mentions regarding the korban Pesach, interestingly, the Pesach Sheni, but it should be eaten together with matzah sumarah. By the way, this also answers some mitzvahs. It's not called chavilos, right? We daven in tefillin. Davening is one mitzvah. Tefillin is another mitzvah. Some mitzvahs we do together. The pasuk speaks about doing them together. So he did it based on the pasuk. But what the Gemara is pointing out is that don't compare our eating with Hillel's eating. Because that's what we're saying. Even according to Hillel, eating it together, when each one is a mitzvah on the same level, then they're not mevatel one the other. But now that it's not on the same level, now that maror is midrabanan, don't eat it together. So now when you begin learning this, you begin thinking, oy gewalt. So how ironic, we eat it together, and we say kachas Hillel. And how can we compare what we are doing with what Hillel did? Hillel did it because it was the Eraisa the Rabbi. So hold on, Bartzu. Amar Rabbi Yechanan. I want you to know that Hillel, Taka ate it together, but Hillel is not the only opinion over here. Choilkin olav chaveirav al Hillel. And l'chu'ura, the chaveirav is a rabbim and a yachid. That the Rabbanan don't agree with him. They hold that it must be eaten separately. The Tanya and Rabbi Yechanan knew that. Now, as we will see, the Tanya that Rabbi Yechanan brings will be refuted. The understanding of the Braisa will actually be that this Braisa holds like Hillel, but it doesn't refute Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan had a Mesoira that the Chachamim argued with him. It's not a Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel means that everyone did that. Hillel means that he did it, but his Chaveirav were Cholkim. So the time you learned in the Braisa, you might think, now the literal type just taka, not like Hillel. You would think that you wrap it together and you eat it all. Therefore, it says, according to the same pasuk, right? The 9:11, and the 9 Pedic, the test pasuk Yudalef, al matris umerodim yerchluhu. And here's the diuk, my friends. Yoichlu means they shall eat. They shall eat. Clear. Yoichluhu with the extra hey vav means they shall eat it. It's specifying in the singular. Now, what's the singular? Now, here's the word that's going to throw everything upside down. Afilu zebefnei atzmai v'zebefnei atzmai. Doesn't have to be together. It could be separately. Now, if you take out the word afilu, again, the beginning of the Braisa, it sounds like you would think that you have to eat it together. Talmud Loimer, no, it. Again, not yoichlu, but yoichluhu. Says the Gemara, hold on 1 second. The Braisa is not saying that you should not eat it together. This Tana actually holds like Hillel. He holds that you should eat it together. The Braisa is saying is that afilu, you didn't, it's also good. Maskavol Ravashi from this Braisa, Yachi, what the word afilu doesn't fit. If the Braisa is saying that you must eat it separately, don't say you may eat it separately. Elo Amar Ravashi, and underline hi. Hi Tana Hachikama. Rabbi Yechanan has a Mesoira. Rabbi Yechanan knows that the Chaveirav of Hillel were argued with him. This Braisa holds taka like Hillel. Eloma, even when you have Shitas Hillel, does Hillel hold you must have it together? Or it's ideal to have it together? So that's what this Braisa cloud. It's better to have it together. But you don't have to have it together. The Braisa is saying, I hold like Hillel. But lest you think that you have to have it together, and if you don't, you're not yoitza. In other words, you have to eat it only kederach shehilol oichlan. So that's the Talmud Loimer. So Hashem added a letter. It to tell you afilu zebefnei atzmai. Excuse me, zebefnei atzmai. But lechatchila. But this Tana holds lechatchila. You should eat it together. Okay. Now listen to this. Says the Gemara. This is the Gemara speaking now. Hashta deloy itmer hilchasa. Not like Hillel. Here you clearly see. And not like the Rabbanan that Rabbi Yechanan was referring to. Not this Braisa. Who do we paskin like? So to cover all opinions, mevarech al achilas matzah v'achil v'haden mevarech al achilas marar v'achil. Like this, we eating them separately is certainly subscribing to the Chachamim that disagree with Hillel. However, v'hader achil matzah, and then we have the matzah v'chasa, chasa is chazeres, and the marar. Hadiyadadi, we eat it again together as a sandwich, what we call beloy bracha, because we already fulfilled the obligation, and we do it zecher lemigdash kihilul, a zecher. Now hold on a second. Having a zecher lemigdash is nice. You're having the matzah and the marar. We said that the marar doesn't belong here on a biblical level. So the marar is mevatel the matzah. So when we're making a sandwich, we're not doing it to upgrade, so to say, our matzah eating. Because the matzah may not be eaten with anything other than another mitzvah doiraisa that we don't have. In the night of the Seder, there's really two doiraisas, Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim and eating matzah. The reason why we're eating it together, Zeichel Migdash, is at least to upgrade the marar. Because from the mother's perspective, this is important, The mother doesn't lose anything if it's being eaten together with matzah. Adarabah, lo yasa mitzvah umavatal mitzvah. You're eating the mother. The matzah is not going to be mavatal the mother. It's the mother that is mavatal the matzah. This is so significant. Al pi chasidus, which is beautiful. The whole theme, Tanya, beginning with Perek Chava, the importance of simcha. And let's connect matzah to chedus to simcha, and mother to merirus. Which in merirus, and the whole goal is to get out of the bitterness, to ivdu as Hashem b'simcha, that's the yisoid. But Tanya Perek Chavtes, it's amazing. The Alter Rebbe writes, right, quoting the Rav, the Masifta the Rekiah, that if you have a log and the log is not catching fire, sometimes you have to break it down. That there is sometimes a place to undergo a tremendous avoid of merirus. And I think it's gavaldik that the maror, it's maror with the matzah, is even when you're bitter, b'seichet b'simcha. Eating maror alone is already something that is not always needed. And l'chayda, that's the whole concept of Hillel. That Hillel was the ultimate Isha Chesed. That on the Madrega of Hillel, even the maror should be eaten together with the matzah. And no, more than that, you're eating the maror with the matzah for the maror, the way we're learning. Bisman Beis HaMikdash Kaim, it's both equal. But now you're not mixing them together for the matzah, because adarabah, the maror is ruining the matzah. It's the matzah. It's, in other words, when you're b'simcha, you don't need to add maror. The maror is not adding anything. It's that when a person is b'merirus, they also have to have some sort of connection to the joy that comes through the bittul, that comes through the matzah. Okay. Weiter. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Yishia. And Chevra, here, let's go a few moments to chazer some laws.
Rabbi, can I ask one question?
Of course you could.
The yochlu hu, it seems like, according to where we left off, that the extra hu is actually not a proof to eating it together, but rather to eating it separate.
Exactly. It's saying that even though Hillel advocated it together, if you ate it separate, you yoitza. Yochlu is telling you not ideal. It's telling you that you're yoitza if you eat it separately. If a yid on the go,
we read it by the Seder, we always say, we read Yechlu Hu as it's like, that's the proof to Hillel, but actually it's really a proof against Hillel.
Everything is turned on its head. This thing of, in other words, first of all, we're not saying that because of Zeichel Lemigdash you may not eat it together, but you see that eating it together, where do you find you make a Zeichel, but you're ruining it? It ruins the matzah. The mother ruins the matzah. It's the matzah that upgrades.
Rabbi, is it possible?
Yeah.
Is it possible that Hillel will hold that not Bisman Beis HaMikdash, that you do eat it separately? Meaning the whole reason he wanted to eat it together was because they were both on the same level.
You're so right. We're saying Zeicher LeMikdash. We're saying Zeicher LeMikdash. We're saying clearly we're not fulfilling.
But how do we're bringing a raya from Hillel who lived Bisman Beis HaMikdash. How do we know he would hold that not Bisman Beis HaMikdash?
You're making a point. I'm not going to argue. I agree with you. What I can add is that al pi chasidus, when chasidim, we try to avoid the avoida of sadness as much as we could. It fits. No, you can't eat it together because the mother is going to ruin the matzah. Even according to so you have to eat it separately. But after you eat it separately, right after the Perek Chavtes and Perek Lamed, you go right back to simcha. Okay, now. Number one of the Shmoyne Asar Davar is that Yodayim Hashniyas L'Truma, which means that even though on a biblical level, a body cannot be a sheni, even though people say that it's not true, that it's full yom is midoraisa, but generally the body is not going to be, the hands for sure are not separated from the body midoraisa. Either you are tahar or you're tamei. The Chachamim went ahead and they said that a person's hands are by default on the level of a sheni. Sheni cannot be metame chulin. We don't follow Rabbi Akiva, if you remember. Truma or kachim could become tame on the level of a sheni. So yadayim are poislin as a truma and they're metame and kachim. That's din number one. Now there's another rabbinic law, and that rabbinic law is that if something that is able to make truma tame, which is something on a level of a sheni, or worse, or rishon, or an av, if it touches mashkin, if it touches liquids. So normally when there is a transference of tumah, the rule is that it goes down a notch. The makabel is tameh on a level lower. Sometimes you have a midrash, sometimes you have a tumah, halal cherev, the exceptions, that the tumah stays on the same level, which is a big novelty. So an av conveys the recipient an av. But now we have something that you don't have midoiraisa. And that's because of the gezerah, of mashkin, of a zoiv. It's not again why they made it. And that is that if anything that's at least able to be matame truma, which means something on a level of a sheni, or higher or worse, if it touches liquids, the liquids become rabbinically a tchila, a rishon. That means it can even go up a level. So if a sheni touches liquids, midrabanan, it becomes a rishon. Now a rishon can be matame chulin on a biblical level, because chulin can become a sheni. So says the Gemara, Omar Rab Elazar, Omar Rab Oishaya, and as we'll see in the next line, that Rav Papa understands the statement to be based on that which we learned in the Mishnah, that the chazeres, right, which was the case the Mishnah gave of the karpas, right, metabel, that it's dipped. Now again, I know that nowadays we don't dip it, because we don't use chazeres, we dip it in salt water, but it's dipped. Or if you use then the romaine lettuce, here the Mishnah spoke about being metabolit, let's even go your metabolit inside the charoises. And yes, it's important to repeat that minig Chabad is when you make charoises, don't add the wine. Because since we follow Zeichel Migdash, we don't want any liquids to touch the wine's gebrachts. But coming back in the Mishnah over here, that's a chumrah that we have. And that's a chumrah that was instituted by the Magid. Huh? But no, they would make it, they would have a juicy, liquidy tibul. The charoises was very liquidy, at a status of mashkin, and you dip it into the mashkin. So says Rabbi Ishia that kol shetibule b'mashkem, anything that's dunked into mashkin, he was referring to our Mishnah. You can't just go kadesh, which is the first thing the Mishnah spoke about on Kuf Yudalet, Kiddush, and the second Mishnah spoke about eating karpas. There has to be a step in between Kaddish and karpas. And what's the step? Urchatz. That's the Gemara. You have to wash your hands. Because number one, your hands, midrabanan, it's like a rabbanan on a rabbanan, which is something that normally we don't do. So your hands are shniyos. And then we have the rule. And I'm reading inside the second to last line of the Rashbam, that the chol ha-poisel esatruma, you know what poisel esatruma means? It means not that it makes truma tummy on the level that it can still convey truma. That's called metama truma. Poisel esatruma means that if something is on the level of a sheni, so if it has contact with truma, the truma is at the end of the line, which means a sheni. Kol ha-poisel esatruma means anything that's sheni or worse, metame mashkin liyois tchila. That's the rule. If it has contact with any halachic liquid, and guys, there are 7 halachic liquids, and the mnemonic to remember is yad, shochat, dam. So yayin, devash, shemen, chalav, tal, and then we said the dalid, yad shochat, dam. So what's the dam? Dam, blood, devash and dam, and mayim, these are the 7 liquids. So they become a rishon. And let's go further. And now a rishon can be metama a sheni. And it will make the chulin that you're eating tummy.
The liquids itself, your hands are a sheni, right?
And I touch liquids.
The liquids become a rishon, or the food?
The liquids become a rishon. And then the food will become a sheni. Now, what's the issue over here? So look inside the last Tosfos. So he quotes Perish Bekuntris. He's quoting a Rashi, not here, from Chulin. And he goes on, and he comes, and therefore what? And therefore the Chachamim obligated you to wash your hands. The third line into the Tosfos, V'tzarech litol k'moy ben naham. Now, according to this Shita and many others, that because of the rule of kol ha-poisel esatruma metama mashkin liyas tchila, and the Chazal then were mechayiv you to wash your hands exactly the way they obligated you to wash your hands before you eat bread. If that would be the case, if it's a chiyuv midrabanan, then what would you do when you wash your hands? You would say, like any other rabbinic law that you, God, commanded us to listen to the rabbinic laws, and so is Shitas Rashi. And the Tosfos here argues, and he says that no, when it comes to eating bread independent of the fact that anyways we are coming nowadays on a much higher level of Tumah. As this Gezerah evolved, it began with Shlomo HaMelech, but it came to the point that any time a Yid is going to eat bread, they have to wash their hands. Yes, you have to make a bracha because there is an obligation with the Rabbanon. However, Tosfos argues with Rashi and he holds that this concept of kol apoitos hatruma b'tama mashkin liyas tchila is not mechayev you in itself to wash your hands, but it's connected to another derabanan. And that other derabanan that we're going to speak out now is not shayich b'zman hazeh. The Chachamim wanted for us to keep our chulin tahor. Now, if the person is completely tahor, if the only issue is that stam yadayim ashniyos, and taka now washing my hands will make sure that the chulin that I will eat will not become tamei, so then I would wash my hands. But nowadays, that anyways, we are tamei in a level of a tumas meis. We're an av. Washing our hands is not going to prevent the chulin from becoming tamei, like it doesn't prevent the bread to becoming tamei. Tosfos holds, now there's no such an obligation. Bechlal to wash your hands. Based on this machloikas, paskins the Shulchan Aruch, so what do? We wash our hands and we don't make a bracha. Gewaltig. Okay. Now, Rabbi Lazar, Omar Rabbi Oisha, they said it because of our Mishnah. Now, hold on. The Mishnah never said how much of a dipping do you need to do with the chazeres. And think about it. If the issue is that if your hands, which are in a status of a sheni, if it were to touch the liquids would become a rishon. Okay. But what happens if I'm only metabolite by putting a little bit of it into the moisture? Lav dafke will my hands touch the liquid. If my hands won't touch the liquid, even though stam yodayim are shniyos, but a sheni cannot make the vegetable into a shlishi, it's not truma. The problem is only if it touches liquid that takes it back into a rishon, that can be metame even chulin. So Omar Rav Papa Muzman Zagin Shmami no. Again, the fact that this ruling was said on the Mishnah means he basically added a step. It's not Kaddish Karpas, but it's Kaddish Urchatz. Karpas is Araya Hai Chasa, which the Mishnah was speaking about on Daf Kuf Yudalid, the Chazeres. The Mishnah says that you're metabel, heviu lefanav metabel b'chazeres, Daf Kuf Tezvav Amid Beis. Zarai tzorech l'shakuye b'charoisis. You have to completely immerse it. Gavaldik. It has to be completely dunking into the charoisis. The charoisis is being used because you're using chazeres. Now, why couldn't they use for karpa salt water? We'll see in a moment. Whenever you're eating chazeres, you have to dip it into charoisis. Mishum kappa or kappa. Now, it's amazing. Let's go with Shitas Tosfos. Tosfos brings the Rabbeinu Hananel. Kappa, the Rabbeinu Hananel says, is a certain type of worm. These worms could be found in romaine lettuce. 1 second, you can't eat worms biblically. No, this worm you can eat, Tosfos explains. Any creature that was created inside a product and it never crawled on the ground, that's a whole sugya here. It was never shoyreitz al haaretz, it never left its place. The issue is not about macholas asurais, which is many lavim to eat a bug. The issue is health, that this kappa had a certain a certain poison that was very unhealthy. And how do you resolve it? By dipping it dafke into charoisis. And the choira is that the charoisis will, the sweetness of the fruits that we use for the charoisis counters the negative effects of the kappa. And you have to dip it in all the way, because the if you would not have to dip it in all the way, yes, you're making a dipping, but you're not going to dip it in all the way. So then etilas yadayim lamali. I get it that stam yadayis are shniyas. And yes, if something that has enough tuma, even only on the level that it can pass al truma, if it touches mashkin midrabanan, the mashkin become a tchila, become a rishon. But who says you're going to touch the liquid? You just dip it in a little bit. Holei naga.
They didn't use forks back then.
We don't use forks today, correct? Danny's making a good point, and that's for sure. They didn't use forks. Forks is mamash amineg of the you should eat with your hands. I'm just kidding.
So does that mean we should have to do with our hands?
We do it with our hands.
Oh,
I never saw karpas with the fork. I saw my father. All right. You're in the table you died. Oh. And the deal was anymore. No, that's not a raya. Maybe Hold on. If you're not going to dip the chazeres all the way into this charoises, we're worried about this worm that's unhealthy. So amazing. What counters the unhealthiness of the worm is when it's living, and only the smell of the charoises. And how does it smell it? Because it's in close proximity already resolves the kappa. That's the way that Rabbeinu Hanana learns this whole Gemara. There's different ways of learning, like any other Gemara. Kappa only mirechamayis. So you don't have to dip it in. You don't need contact. You need proximity. And for that, you have to dip any part of the chazeres in the charoises. You're good. Again, he was saying it in context of the Seder because Dilma Meshakele, since you might dip it in. Gavaldik. So now we have not the Mishnah Gemara. Now we have Kaddish. Now you have Urchatz, Anayazach, and based on a Machloikas Rishonim and how to understand the Gemara, if you're not mechuyev midrabanan to do it, then you're taking a bracha in vain. So we have to be safik brachas takalahakam. That's the rule by brachas. Almost all brachas, by brachas that are only of rabbinic origin, which is birchas hamitzvos. So we don't make a bracha. Now, v'omar of Papa. Now that we're speaking about dipping in the marer in charoises, even though we're speaking about karpas, but our Mishnah is speaking about a karpas that's made out of chazeres, which is taka also why we dip them when we dip them out in charoises. Taka because of kappa. You have to taka dip it in, but don't allow for it to stay in it for an extended period of time, because the charoises will not only take away the kappa worm or the effect of this worm, it's going to kill it, but the charoises is going to take away all of the bitterness of the butter. Dilma agav kalya the tavlin, because of the sweetness of the tavlin, which is what you put in the charoises, is completely l'mabatlei l'merurein ubeinam tamarer v'leka. Well, that's the counter. That even if marer is within, it's mixed with a matzah or it's mixed with something sweet, but you have to also have marer. There has to be a krishma shalamita. There has to be some time where a person looks into themselves, and naturally there's going to be a certain amount of bitterness of what could have been, and it always can be better. Okay. Says the Gemara, Ad berei Rav Chizda leRabbana Ukva v'Darish. Rav Chizda, we mentioned on Amud Aleph, but he became the Rosh Hashiva. And normally he was the one that gave the drashas. But there was a time, Ad berei means that he encouraged, he promoted for Rabbana Ukva to be the one giving the drasha. And he gave the drasha, and this is his drasha. That not al yadav betibul rishoin, the havamina chevra, the havamina, is that this drasha is not related to the Seder. This is very important. The havamina is that Mar Ukva was speaking stam, when a guy is eating vegetables once, dipping it into something, and then later he's going to eat vegetables again and dip it into something. That's the havamina. That if a person washed his hands, betibul rishoin, as we just learned on Amud Aleph, you dip something into water, whether you're mechuyev or whether bisman that the chulin was tohid, regardless, then you have to wash your hands. Nevertheless, noitel yadav betibul sheni. Now this does sound very Seder related, but again, that's the havamin. Wash your hands once, it's not good enough. Wash your hands again. So hold on. So Amru Rabbana Kameder of Papa. When they chazered his Torah, so they said it must be that this drasha of Rabbana Ukva was ba'alma itman, like we mentioned. It wasn't benegeh the Seder. It was time if a guy ate and he dipped the vegetables once and then he decided to do it again. Because the Isalka Daitach, if you would think that Rabbana Ukva was darshaning this benegeh to our sugya, benegeh the Seder, hacha itmer, then it doesn't make sense. Why would you have to wash your hands a second time? You washed it the first time. In other words, since in the Seder, you know when we are metabel, when we dip the karpas today in Salzwasser, we know that we will be dipping the mud in again. So that knowledge would mean that you won't be masich das, and the first washing should be good for later. When you're having a meal and you wash your hands for bread, anything that's in that meal, you don't have to wash your hands again. He meant that if a person was stam eating and they didn't know that they're going to be eating another vegetable platter in which they're going to be dipping it into something moist again. They didn't know that. So when you wash your hands once, you have to wash your hands again. That is what the first reaction was to his drasha. However, Amalu Hudaf Papa, no. Adarabam, Dafke, his whole drasha was regarding the Seder, which is exactly what we do. We wash our hands again. Because if he would be speaking about Ba'alma, where do you find B'chlal eating vegetables? Who would eat vegetables? Right? What was the Eitzah? I forgot where we learned it. I think it was Rab Chizda giving advice to his daughters. In the place of vegetables, eat meat. Like, why waste stomach space on something so insignificant? You're going to have 2 vegetable courses. Wo ist das Gehalt geworden? Tafshin Peyalev. Vegetarian restaurants. You're going to have 2 but no, it's not even shaykh, such a thing. You're eating once and at a later time you're going to eat again. Of course he's speaking about the Seder. The Seder is the only night that we eat vegetables twice, which is taka to arouse the curiosity. Who's Geherd geworden? So the Gemara asks a question. Hold on. The Elamai hachi itmer, but it doesn't make sense. Taka, that's the, why did they have a havamina that it wasn't about the Seder? When I dip the karpas, I know I'm going to be dipping in the mother. So why isn't my washing good enough? Says the Gemara, no, that's not correct, because there's a hefsek in time. You can be sitting around the table, but it's a long break between the first karpas and when you dip the mother in. Omri, so they explained that kivin the boy lamemer agadato, the mitzvah of magid is in between the karpas and the mother, and a very important detail, and v'halela, which is taka, we say some of the halel dafka at the end of magid. So therefore, dilma asuche aschei ledate, which is the rule when it comes to netilas yadayim. You have to be mindful that your hands are not, stam yadayim are askani the same. You might take your mindfulness away from where are your hands going, and v'naga, you might touch a place which will be matama yadayim again midrabanan, which is why we have to wash our hands again. Now, Chevra, just to point out something, that we wash our hands because we're eating bread, ein chanami. But what we're pointing out is that we should know that washing of the hands that we're doing again for the bread, that washing of the hands is also essential for the mother. Just we don't have to wash it right after you washed your hands for the bread, because there's no hesachadas, there's no agadato and halela. Gewaldig. Okay, we're good, Chevra. Weiter. More about the Seder of the Seder. Amar Rava says Rava. So we spoke about, we're going a little bit out of the Seder Kaddish. We added urchatz, karpas. Now we're going to come to the yachatz soon. We're going to come to the yachatz today. But before that, we spoke about the magid. Now rachza, because you have to wash your hands again, even though you're eating matzah, but that washing is also for the mother. Moitzi matzah, right, mother. We also spoke about the koiref and amadal. But let's go. Amar Rava, what happens? Bala matzah, if a person swallowed the matzah, meaning swallowing the matzah, look inside the rashbam towards the end of the narrow lines. V'loy lo asa, you did not chew it. Now what chewing does is it brings out the taste. Chewing is also an act of gevura. You're breaking it down. You ate matzah without chewing it. You were yoitze. Why are you yoitze? Because it says that Rashbam, since it says in Parshas Ba'ibah, Erev toichlu matzahs, eating, the act of eating is also included if you did not taste it that much. If you did not chew it, it's called eating. You ate it. However, bala marar, but if you ate the marar without chewing it, lo yotza. Why? The Rashbam de bo'inan tam marar veleka and mishum hachi kaped rachmana lemarer espiv shel oichel zecher to the vayimararu es chayim kach matzasi kosev b'chol asfarim. And we'll leave it at this. So eating matzah without chewing it is good. Eating matzah without chewing it is not good. So now, what's going to happen if bala matzah matzah? And let's go back to what we said on Amud Aleph, that the wrapping of the matzah and the matzah, don't envision the way we do it today. Adarabba, take the lettuce and wrap it around the matzah. That's the way Rashbam learns. If you wrap the matzah around the matzah and you swallow them together, which means that the matzah didn't even touch your throat, didn't go into the palate, because the matzah was inside the matzah, and the matzah, without chewing, you're not yoitze. When you swallow the matzah, even though you didn't chew it, at least the matzah went into your mouth. Here, the matzah is inside the mother, as we learned the Rashbam. Still, yidei matzah yes yotza. That's a big chiddush. We're going to say that you fulfill the obligation of matzah, but yidei mother lo yotza. The matzah did not touch your throat. The mother is not called a hefsek. It's not called a chatzitza. It's not an interposition. However, karachan besiv is a product bast that's not food. And then you pull on and you swallowed it, a matzah in a pill, so then af yedei matzah nami lo yotza. No, it's something that's not a food item, this is yisoidis, that makes a chatzitza. I know you don't have to taste the matzah, but you have to eat it. Eating it means it has to be in your mouth. It has to go down your throat. Not eating it, putting it in the vein or putting it into the stomach. That's not called eating. So even though you put it in mudder and mudder has to be chewed, mudder is food. So mudder is not creating a chatzitza. So you were yoitze yedei matzah, not yedei mudder. But if the matzah isn't something that's not called a food item, so the issue isn't only you didn't chew it, the thing itself wasn't directly in your mouth, then you're not yoitze. Gavaldik, Amar Rav Shimi Barashi. That matzah lifnei, okay, good. Now another thing. Who has the ka'ara plate? So there's two opinions. Rav Shimi Barashi says, matzah lifnei kol echad v'yachad, mara lifnei kol echad v'yachad, Charoi says lifnei kol echad v'yachad. However, the concept of removing the table, which is one of the things that we do in order to arouse the curiosity of those sitting around, they should be especially the children. It's called akiras hashulchan. That was only done because he's used to during the year, taka by Kiddush, there's no table there. After Kiddush, everything is brought out, and then people eat. And here they bring everything out. All your toyim is ashtikel karpas, and then they would remove the whole table. So the kids would ask, "Whoa, what's going on?" So you're doing something to arouse the curiosity. That is something that only has to be done for the balabas or for the reciter of the Haggadah, which should be the balabas. But when it comes to bringing out all of the Seder items, says Rav Shimi, every person should have in front of them the matzah and the mother and the charoises, etc. However, Rav Huna oimer no kulu nami lifnei mi she'oimer Haggadah. That all of the items, the ka'ara plate, what we call, is only placed one for the family, one for the one who's reading the Haggadah. And we're going to speak today, Mamash soon connected the flow to nafkaminas. And what's the halacha? Says the Gemara, like Rav Huna, that there's no obligation to have a Seder plate in front of every person. It's not that one may not place, but the Seder plate is placed in front of one. And now the Gemara, we're going to come back to that in a moment when we start the next sugi. I want to speak about the nafkaminas, whether you do have a plate, whether you don't have a plate. So hold on. You mentioned, even according to Rav Shimi, that everyone has the plate, but you only remove it. Today we don't remove it. Today the minig is, it says in this, in our Haggadah, in the Rebbe's Haggadah, that you uncover the matzah, you cover the matzah, you're constantly moving the matzah around. And that's also Kadesh Yishu Alu Atinoikis. But why do we remove it? So Amad Devei Rabbi Yanai, they said in the Yeshiva Rabbi Yanai, Kadesh Yakiru Tinoikis Vishu Alu. Because we want to stimulate them. And this is so true, especially in the times of Chazal. Imagine you make Kiddush, they bring a plate, vegetable was not food then. So vegetable is like an appetizer, okay? Even today, it's not a meal, at least for many people, and having an onion, and then they take the plate away. The child will say, "Hey, where's supper? Vastusto?" And indeed, the Gemara tells a story that Abaya have a Yosef Hamid Rabba, who adopted him, his Rebbe and his father. And Chaza, the Komadle Taka Mekame, and he Taka saw, right? They brought the plate in front of Rabba, and they took the plate away. And Abaya, as a child, Amar Lahu, he right away asked this Rabba, we didn't eat yet, and yet, Asu, Akri Taka Mikamai, Mikamon, and they are already removing the plate. So you know what Rabba says? Rabba says, wow, look at this line. Look inside the Rashbam, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. The Tanya, we're going to learn soon that Chacham b'noi shoyaloi, that if someone has a wise son, then you don't have to give the questions to the child. Then the child is asking on his own. It's if The imlav, if the child doesn't have his own questions, her own questions, then shoyul hula atzma here means that you should ask yourself. If you don't have a child, ask yourself. And what do you ask yourself? The manashtana questions. So understands that Ashram and our Gemara, that it means that if the child already has a kasha, that's enough. You don't have to make the manashtana questions. You can start with Havada Mayinu. The kivin, the last line of the Rashbam, the kivin shesho'alo lanu manashtana. Once, like Abaya asked, why did they remove the table? That's not one of the kashas of manashtana. But once you're asking a question, so then ein ono tzricham lema manashtana elo lohashav al devarav shel benoi. And what's the answer? Look inside the Rashbam. Avoda mayinu lefi sheneshtabadnu b'mitzrayim ono oisim kol devarim alolu. No, that's
how old was Abaya when he didn't know?
An answer before they ask a question. Yes, Shlomo.
How old was Abaya when he didn't know yet what's going on?
I would say 2 years old. Stama. Maybe he was one. If I insulted him. Stama, he was 1 year old. He just made with his hands. Like, why are you taking the food away? Oh, Avodah Mayinu. But this is very important. In other words, let me speak to it, but practically. The goal is to inspire our children to ask. You know, if they're going to read Manashtana and if they're reading it the way they read Ashrei, the way some people read Ashrei, it's to engage them. That's the ikir. So if they're not asking, so then we ask. But he told them, I don't even have to say Manashtana. That's what he told them. And he went right away to the answer. Now, Lamai Nafkamin, if you have a ka'ara or not. So we have time, thank God. Let's begin the next sugya. I'll give you one of the Nafkamins. Says the Gemara. This is so important. Right, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. 2 dots. Omar Shmuel. That when it says, guys, we read this every time we read Kol HaBachar in Parshas Re'eh. It is there where the Torah refers to the matzah as lechem oini. Now, really, in the Gemara, it's spelled ayin vav nun yud, but it's not written that way. It's written the same letters of ani, ayin nun yud, a poor person. Oini, we pronounce it oini. So Taiches Shmuel. This is the bread of affliction. Nish, no, that's one of the 3 interpretations. Lechem she'oinin all of devarim. Oina means to respond or to recite. In other words, the whole concept that the bread is brought out, then now we bring out the bread right away. The matzahs right away. But then they would bring it after Kiddush. But they would bring it out after Kiddush. They would bring out the bread after. Do you wash after Kiddush? Absolutely not. The whole mitzvah of Agadata and of Hallel is dafka, as we just mentioned, is all before you begin the meal. So it's a bread that has to be in front of you, upon which all of the words are recited. And indeed, Tanya Nami Hachi, Lechem Oini, Lechem Sho'oinin, all of Devarim Harbe. That's one understanding. Another understanding of Lechem Oini Davar Acher, right? Kriksiv, Tatake Lechem Oini. I know that's the way it's pronounced, but the Torah did not write a Vav, and therefore it could be read Kometz Ayin. Oni Ksiv. The bread of a poor man. What's pshat? The bread of an ani. Ma'ani shadarke beprusa pasha, because of his poverty cannot afford always a whole loaf. An ani sometimes eats a broken bread. Guys, yachatz. Before we come to the choytfin that we said developed from the Gemara, it wasn't the times of the Gemara. That's not the meaning of the Gemara that they would chapta afikoyim. But yachatz means that since one understanding of lechem oini is that we must have broken prusa, unlike Shabbos and Yom Tiv that we have lechem Mishnah, that the matzah has to be broken. Now, Afkan, on top of Kufta Zayin, beprusa. Now let me ask you a question. Upon which do you make the bracha? Upon which do you make the bracha? Upon which do you eat? It depends. If lechem ani means prusa, then you should eat the kazayis from the broken one. If we're going to teach lechem oini, lechem she'oinin all of devarim harbe, then adarabba, when you make a mitzvah, it's ideal to make a mitzvah on something that's sholem, and you should dafki eat the wholesome bread, which is why, my friends, that it's ideal that if you have a ka'ara, this is only if you have a ka'ara. So first of all, when you make the bracha, we wash our hands. We wash our hands for the matzah and for the marar. right? That was the drasha of Rabbana Ukva. We are going to make a hamoitzi lechem in haaretz like on every Yom Tov, even though in Beitza there's a machlokes whether the mana fell double out of Yom Tov or not, but we have lechem Mishnah on Yom Tov. Now we have 3 matzahs. We broke one to fulfill the lechem shema darke beprusa. The minig is to break the middle one. But when I'm going to make the hamoitzi lechem in haaretz, what will I lift? I'm going to lift all 3. I have to lift all 3. I have to. It's ideal to lift all 3 farvos because I want to have the shleimus. I'm lifting all 3, but one of them is broken. The larger half was already removed for the afikoymen. Now, so the hamoitzi lechem in haaretz, I'm doing good. I'm doing it on lechem Mishnah. But then when I make the Ashai Kedishana B'Mitzvah V'Tzivanu El Achilas Matzah, I dafka drop the Yisrael Matzah. What do I have in my hand right now? The one on the top, the wholesome one, and the Prusa. And on that I make the Al Achilas Matzah. And from which one do I eat? That's why we learn in Alter Rebbe Paskins that you have a Ka'ara, eat 2 Kezesim. Now you understand why. I'm eating 2 Kezesim because if lechem ani means beprusa, then fakir, the mitzvah is to eat the middle one. Eat a kezayis from the middle one. If we're going to teach lechem ani, either the first understanding of Shmuel or the third one that we'll learn in a moment, then again, do the mitzvah on something that's shalom. So you can eat 2 Kezesim. But if you have a ka'ara, if you do not have a ka'ara, then you only eat 1 kezayis. I'm just giving you a nafkamina. What difference will it make whether you have a ka'ara or not? How many kezaysim will you eat for the mitzvah of al achilas, for the mitzvah of matzah? Stam lahoyer, that because of the breaking a kezayis from the top and kezayis from the bottom, and fakert, and not everyone has a ka'ara now, we paskin like Rafuna, that it's a good eitz toiva that before, especially when you have, mitzvahim, or you have a big family, you have many people around the table, everyone should already have their kezayis. People who don't have a ka'ara, they should already prepare the kezayis before they go wash. If not, there's going to be a huge break of time, not only between everyone washing and eating, but then afterwards everyone has to have the kezayis. Now, obviously, the one who has the ka'ara, you cannot have the 2 kezesim in your hand because then you're going to be breaking it. Other people also have a minig that everyone should have a little bit of the ka'ara. Okay, everyone should have a kezayis. You make your bracha, and then share a little bit with everyone if that's the minig, but try to minimize the time between the washing and of the eating. Let's just finish the third one, the top line. The third understanding of lechem oini is ma darkei shel ani. And the way that Rashbam understands over here is that a person who's poor doesn't have enough money to buy fuel. So when they light the oven, if only after the oven caught, then they're going to start preparing the dough. By the time they put the dough in the oven, you know what's going to happen? They ran out of fuel. So to economize time, they're going to work in a team. That at the same time that someone is warming up the oven, while the wood is chopping, at that time the dough is being made. So the moment the oven is ready, the dough is already going to be put in there. That madarka shalani, because of the lack of fuel, Rashbam says. According to the Radhan, is people are starving, aniyim. So when they finally have the food, they wanted to get it ready ASAP. Hu masik, he's going to be lighting the oven, and the ishtoi will be the one baking. Afkan nami hu masik the ishtoi oifa, which means, according to the Rishonim, many things. Number one, it means that you should be making the matzahs yourself. Do it yourself. Number two, it means to make it quickly. Because if you remember, we were learning that as long as there's movement in the dough, we had this in the Mishnah, I think, it's not going to become chametzik. And all of the eitzes that the Mishnah gave, and if you see it rise, put some cold water on it, the whole rush comes from this. Eat it the way an ani eats it, which is, an ani doesn't kratz when he makes the food, he makes it very quickly. Now, just to understand that the doing it yourself, or you do it and your wife does it, just al pi Kabbalah, which is very important, independent of the topic of the kashrus of machine matzahs, but to be aware that all of the spiritual properties of matzah, like it says in the Zohar, again, the first night be'ikir, it's michla de mehemnusa, and a second night it's michla de asfasa. It gives you emunah and it gives you healing. Those properties only are imbued in the matzah if the maker of the matzah was a person with a nefesh elikis, a yid, man, woman, a Jew. And taka, that's the way it happens today. That so many people are involved. he's preparing this, and the wife is the one preparing that. And again, the minig of many people to make the matzah on their own comes from over here. If you know what you're doing. We quoted my mother's father, of blessed memory, that he worked in the matzah bakery in Crown Heights, and he saw all the people with the greatest intentions to make matzahs mitzvah and erev yontiv, and he says he would never eat of those matzahs. To be continued.
So lechem oini, Rabbi, no one says that?
What was that? What was that?
Lechem oini, that's just the bread of affliction. That's the pashup shot, and these three explanations are just like drush.
No, but this is bread of affliction is almost amaratzis. Lechem oini. 1 second, Danny. Bread of affliction is the second two interpretations.
No, but that's lechem oni.
Yeah,
right?
That's a lechem like an oni. Either that it's not complete or that it was made quick.
I understand, but I'm just saying oni is not the same as affliction. Whatever, it's different.
Correct. So you know what? So then, it's nothing that goes on here.
Go ahead.
This is the bread of oini. I would write that. I got to write. This is the bread of oini. That's the better interpretation.
Oh.